Lynched on CTV, proudly brought to you by Christchurch's #1 dining offer, Sequoia 88 at the Redwood Hotel, a food concept unequalled. Good evening. The man in charge of the rebuild of Christchurch's city centre is quitting. Warwick Isaacs, the director of the Christchurch Central Development Unit, is leaving to take up a job at a home building company. He is my guest tonight, and Lynched starts right now. Good evening to you. The man known as Mr. Rebuild has had enough. He's quitting. Warwick Isaacs' resignation was just last week, and let's get straight to it because we've got plenty to discuss, and he joins me now. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening,
You had
Chris.
enough?
No, not at all. I haven't had enough, but it's time for me to have a change in my own life.
You see, the first thing I thought of when I heard that you were leaving is you're leaving when hardly anything has really happened, and you're going before the ship sinks, and you've got a better offer down the road, and you thought, I'm off.
Not at all. Not at all.
Really?
I'm very proud of what Sarah and CCD have achieved in the last 4 years. And if I look in the central city, the bus interchange we finished in a few short months. Mid-year there'll be buses coming in out of there. Justice Emergency Precinct is well underway.
Look, I'll give you that because there is a good vibe now when I start seeing development. You know, I'm impatient.
Yes,
man.
yes.
It's
like me.
It's nice to see things happening. However, with the exception of those two things, though, I hope we're not on different planets here because when I was driving through the city today to get from A to B, I was still thinking, gee, it looks miserable. Yeah. Apart from the private development down Durham Street, you know I'm going to say all this, down Victoria Street, it looks fantastic. However, if I'm a tourist that's staying at Rendezvous Hotel in town there, it still looks like a bloody ghost town.
Look, there's plenty of work going on. You would have counted today, if you've been counting, there's about 14 cranes of varying sizes, most of them quite large in the central city. When I look out of my office, which is right next to the City Council building, there's about $2.5 billion of work under construction. Part of our role was not just to deliver buildings for the council and the government as part of the blueprint, it was actually to really encourage the private sector back in and reinvest because they have plenty of options.
No pressure, but have you done that though? Because I still see a lot of empty spaces. I do see a lot of private investment. Don't get me wrong.
There's a lot of that.
The Anthony Golf building, the Glasson, that Cashel Mall precinct, big building. It's looking great, but with the exception of those, it still feels like it's a little ho-hum.
No, look. I don't think it is. If you drive along the River Precinct, we see Steve Collins' new building there where Deloitte is going to, the Orley building over the road, where Lane Neva going in there right next to the Deloitte building, PwC construction's underway. There's an awful lot happening in the private sector. And our projects, the anchor projects, we've talked briefly about the Justice Emergency and bus, but look, the River has started, the River project is well underway. I know some people would like to see it a little quicker, but it is actually making very good progress. Also, the Margaret Mahy Playground, that'll be finished mid-year this year. The East Frame, we're now in discussions with a bidder who's come through the process. Look, that's to develop 700 or 800 private residential units in there. So, Innovation Precinct, if you'd popped down there, we would have seen the work underway now on the Vodafone headquarters. Also Kathmandu next door, Wynyard Group going over the road in the old Mackenzie and Willis site. So there is really an awful lot happening.
Am I being too unkind then? And let me be even clearer about it.
Sure.
Like a couple of blocks from Cathedral Square, heading south, right? You've got your Ballantynes down there. You've still got nothing sort of happening, and as you drive your car further down, you've still got a lot of empty spaces apart from the bus exchange that's going up. It still feels like there's not the hype of activity I would expect in 4 years. Am I being impatient?
I think you are being a little impatient, Chris. Not that I'd like to say too much about that, but yes, I think you are. I think all over the central city there are new buildings under construction, or we know that they're certain that they're going to happen. In 4 years, we're really only 3 years on since the earthquakes really stopped. And so people need to be happy that actually the ground was going to stop shaking, it was suitable for reconstruction. They know it is now. You
see, that's a bit of a cop-out though, isn't it? Because you look down Victoria Street and they could say the same argument, but there is nearly, it almost seems like that's the hype of activity now. So that's a cop-out. Come on.
No, they're different. They're different size of buildings. They aren't the larger buildings that inhabit the very central city. So they are different sort of buildings than what the very centre. We also got to remember that the blueprint actually does encompass that part of Victoria Street as well. That's part of the central city.
All right, well, that's good to know. Let's talk about that blueprint, because there's been many criticisms of it. You probably get sick and tired of hearing it. I was talking to urban developer, he's highly critical of the CCDU, Hugh Pavlitich, last week on News Talk ZB. He said the actual inner city has been nothing short of an absolute bureaucratic failure.
Look, everybody's entitled to their opinion about those things.
But did those comments hurt you?
No.
Do you get frustrated by them?
No. Look, I expect those because in my role, it's always been that some people support what we do, some people don't, and a lot of other people just in the middle, they just really want to see the central city come back to life.
Nobody would doubt there were health and safety issues, so part of the reason for locking off the central city for so long, for 2 years, was exactly that. But in hindsight now, was it a bad idea, do you think, from your perspective, from a personal perspective, so you can't say I can't talk about that, to lock off the central city for so long like it was? And didn't that at the end of the day send a message to private investors, sorry, we're going to get our crap together here for 2 years while you go down the road or send yourselves up to Auckland?
No, I think there's no question it was a long time. 2 years is a reasonable amount of time. However, if we'd opened up any earlier, we would have put people at risk. There's no question about that. And you might recall that certainly for the final demolitions that were going on, we were also allowing people back in for rebuild. And you might recall there was some discussion about actually should the red zone stay even longer to allow the constructors to occupy the streets and get on with it. So I think in balance, that amount of time, whilst it appeared long, was about the right amount.
We need to take a break, but I want to come back and continue some of the criticisms you have faced and along with the CCDU, so do stay with us. Lynched on CTV. Welcome back to Lynched on CTV. My guest tonight is outgoing boss of the CCDU, Warwick Isaacs. Warwick, in terms of the IRD building, it sits there looking like something could happen to it.
Sure.
And in some respects, that feels like the symbol of the slowness of the CCDU, because there's a big building there and you still don't know whether it's going to come down, you still don't know whether you're going to on-sell it to developers, you still don't know what to do with it. You know, can you just take me through why on earth that takes so long so I can have a better understanding?
Sure. So, look, we had a purchase process which we went through. That took a period of time, of course.
Yeah.
Then, look, we could have pulled it down a long time ago, but we've also thought about, well, actually, the east frame, it's going to be a residential area. Can that be converted in an economic sense into residential flats, and it would be worth our while to keep it there?
Yeah.
So the process of developing up the thinking for the east frame, how the public realm fits with the buildings, that's taken some time. As I mentioned before, we're in the last throes now of an engagement with a party that we're hopeful will get to a point they can develop the whole area. Part of those discussions with that party are, what value can the Crown get back for that building, convert it into back into commercial space, or in fact into residential, which is really what we're after.
What do you want? So you want to be residential, but I saw in the press the developer was saying that it's not suitable for residential because it lacks light or natural light.
Well, look, it's got windows around the whole building,
well, that's what I thought. It's got enough windows,
we don't want to make that call. We want the developer that we're talking to now to give us some advice about that and tell us how much we might get paid. So really it's about having bought something. Yes, it's sitting there, but we could have demolished it, but then we might destroy some value that's got...
So when will we have an answer on that?
I would think within the next 3 to 4 months we'll know what the answer on that whole east frame, including that building, will be.
The east frame, though, some have suggested that it would have been better to allow the CBD, the residential areas, to grow organically. When you try to create something, it's doomed to failure. What do you say to those critics, Warwick?
Well, I think there's no question the whole central city has moved over a block, hasn't it? It's now more active on the west side of the river. We went out with a clear intention to stimulate the residential demand in the central city, and the east frame is a perfect place for that to occur.
Are you confident people will want to live in the central city?
Well, based on this...
When there's not really much going there at the moment,
sure.
Unless you've got Restart and Ballantyne's and a couple of, decent-looking hotels, you know what I mean? You still need something else, don't you?
Well, that's what the whole Central City Recovery Plan is about, is the whole thing is one package of work. It's not just an anchor project here or there, it's the whole thing. So if the number of people saying to me, come on, we can't wait for those apartments or lofts to be built, we want to buy one or want to live there, I think there'll be great demand as they come out of the ground.
Well, let's discuss what I was interested in. I want you to tell me in your own words, if you will. A residential chapter of Christchurch Central Recovery Plan. The subtitle is What is a Livable City? Can you tell me what a livable city is, in your interpretation?
So a livable city, if I go right back to pre-CCDU days and when the council did share an idea consultation, people talked about green spaces in the central city. They talked about good access for cycling and walking around, and a good safe environment. They also, when we started looking at how we could create the central city like that, we look at, well, what are the rules around residential living in the central city? They were quite restrictive. And so what we've attempted to do, and I believe we've done better than attempt, we've actually achieved it, is looked at the rules so that developers can develop buildings, residential buildings that people can afford to buy. And so that's what livable city is. It's about green, it's about access, it's about restrictions coming off so that you can still have some influence on what neighbours do, but at the end of the day, developers can build for a reasonable cost, therefore people can buy and afford to live in the
Can you explain to me this? In the press last week there was an article saying that the CCDU is relaxing the rules about urban design so people can get on and build. Double-edged sword, I suppose. On one hand, that's exactly what I want because I'm an impatient person. On the other hand, Paul Longsdale, the councillor last week on this programme, was saying that's all very good, but that's still not going to bring down the price of the apartments because there's still no incentive there. All that could possibly do is bring down the building standards, but there's no actual rationale behind bringing down the prices too. What do you say to that argument?
Well, look, I think if you look at the cost of building an apartment, it's not just the physical cost of construction, it's also the regulatory time spent getting consents and necessary building consents and resource consents. So if those things can be more streamlined, it does have a direct impact on the cost to the consumer.
When do you suspect we'll start to see a hive of activity with residential homes back inside those four kind of avenues, or as you say, the west frame, for example?
Oh, look, right now, as I drove out here today, I had to take a bit of a detour because of the Cricket World Cup. There are already quite a number of residential apartments going up, whether it's on Park Terrace or heading back into Victoria Street through there. Also, just on the east of, or sort of northeast of Latimer Square, there's a lot of activity starting to happen there. So I think that is starting and it will gain more momentum.
We've still got plenty to discuss, including convention centres and anchor projects, but I do want to ask you this question. You know this one was coming too. Do you really, when you're working at the CCDU, do you ever have, how much power do you have? Do you have the ability to say, no, that needs to be pushed out to that timeline? Where does the buck stop? Does it stop with you, or does it stop with Jerry Brownlee, or does it stop with a bunch of commissioners and advisors in Wellington? Who has the final say where something goes?
So then, on the blueprint, if I look right back to the blueprint, of course, Cabinet signed that off. Okay, but that was based on good advice from professional landscape folk, architects and specialist economists, all those sorts of things.
Sure.
So that determined where the anchor projects were going. Ultimately, it was a cabinet decision where those went.
But do you have any say in terms of how fast something can happen, in terms of who the contractors that work in the bus exchange? What kind of power do you have?
So
we've
got the time frames. I still have the same things until I finish with Sarah. But for example, it was me at the end of the day that signed off on the contractor appointment for the bus exchange. Now that's been through a process because it's funded by ourselves, the council and New Zealand Transport Agency, so it goes through a bit of a process, gets to my desk and those documents are signed. So yes, a lot of it lies in Christchurch, but the money decisions and those sorts of things are clearly a mix of councillors around the council table and Minister Brownlee and his colleagues in Wellington. Do
you have quite a lot of contact with Minister Brownlee? Say this year, how many times would you say I've met him?
No, look, this year, once or twice, yeah. So we have meetings with Mr Brownlee at various occasions when we either go to Wellington or we have them down in Christchurch.
I've got to take a break soon, but apart from the bus exchange and the Justice Precinct, what physical stuff will I see as an inner city resident of Christchurch happening in the immediate future? And let's just say immediate future, I'll give you till...
End of June.
I'll give you to end of June. Go on then.
Okay.
I'll be kind.
So you'll see finishing of the terraces on the river precinct in front of the
Avon River.
Avon River.
Right.
You'll see the Margaret Mayhew playground completed by the end of June. all going well, and there might be a slight push. You'll see something physical happening on the convention centre other than buildings coming down. There's still one or two there to go. On the East Frame, you'll start to see the public realm commencing. Innovation Precinct well underway already, and we're just finalising there some land transactions for public realm purchase. The land will almost be done by then, but also we'll start to see some public realm coming through there. South Frame, I think by the middle of the year we'll see some public realm going through there as well. Of course, the Hagley Oval, well and truly finished. Game coming up last week.
All right, we need to take a break. When we come back, there is still plenty to discuss on the program. We will discuss Victoria Square. I know, you know what Victoria Square is, don't you?
I do indeed.
Had a lot of issues regarding that. And we'll also discuss the convention centre, who owns it, who's going to pay for it, those questions, important questions. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Lynched on CTV. My guest tonight is CCDU boss Warwick Isaacs. Warwick, let's discuss Victoria Square. Massive public backlash, really, in terms of the lack of public consultation. I get the impression it was well-intended consultation. You talked to council staff, you talked to Ngāi Tahu, but I'm getting a sense from people that phone me up on talkback and emailing me, there's more to life than just speaking to a bunch of people who at Ngāi Tahu and the city council staff members. Do you regret not coming up stronger? And there seemed to be so much confusion about what it was that was going to change Victoria Square.
Look, we've said now we'll talk on an engagement consultation program starting next month. So it was part of the whole Avon River precinct, and that's one piece that people have obviously got a real strong attachment to. And
were you personally shocked by the public backlash?
Oh no! Look, no, because to me, what it shows is that, in fact, I'm pleased there has been this response, because it means we can respond and have a full engagement over it, and people will be able to have their say, and we'll be able to take that into account in determining what happens with Victoria Square.
I got the impression from some people that it wasn't so much the tweaking or whatever that was going to happen, it was the fact that $7 million to cut down a few trees and move the something or other fountain and all that kind of stuff. It seems like a bloody lot of money. How on earth do you come up with these figures? $7 million for that, thank you very much, sir. Check. Do you know what I mean?
We get professional quantity surveyors to look at the things that we want to do, and they say, well,
aren't they on the gravy train then, aren't they?
Well, no, they give their estimates, professionally qualified people, and we take those into account. But look, just alone on the Bowker Fountain, that is something between $700,000 to $1 million, depending on what we actually find when we fully get into that repair of that fountain, for example. And so that's the cost of those things. Moving a heritage statue, even if it's only a few metres, costs money. You've got to protect it, you've got to look after it, and we want to restore it.
But what I'm hearing back from the public, though, Warwick, is that they don't. It doesn't need to be a priority at the moment. That $7 million could be spent elsewhere.
Yeah, but look, the reality is that we have money for the River Precinct that includes Victoria Square.
Okay. So the other question I have is that I guess people are worried that how do we know it's going to be meaningful public consultation?
Well, I think a good example is all the consultation we've done, and again we talked about Livable City. You look at what went out for proposal, we considered the consultation submissions, and quite clearly we've changed significantly. Even just height, we had one height limit in that where we went out and consulted, we've got 2 height limits. We had no urban design rules, got some urban design rules. So quite clearly we do have a history of consulting, engaging, listening, and altering what we do as a result of that. So it will be very meaningful, no question.
Let's talk about this convention centre, which has been a lot of controversy over this. I know that the business case issues regarding that, some of it may have been released, some may not have been released. But at the end of the day, though, convention centres worldwide, the industry for convention centres, the economic data suggests it's on the global decline. We've got one possibly going up in Auckland, Queenstown, Wellington, now Christchurch. Essentially, we're going to be competing against our city friends. Do you worry that there's enough market out there for conventions?
There's been a huge amount of research done in the preparation of the business case and the economic case for the convention centre in Christchurch, as there has been across the country. We don't do it in isolation to the rest of the country either. And so there's consideration of those and how they work together, so that actually we're not competing against other cities in New Zealand, we're competing against other countries in the world. And so,
but you do accept, though, that convention centres as standalone fixtures in any city are loss-making ventures. They don't.
Yes.
They don't really make money.
no, not a whole lot of money. That's correct.
So what is the wider economic benefits then? Do you really believe that the economic benefits come down to what hotels and restaurants make? And does that money really get filtered back to Margaret and Shirley or Chris and Bill or what have you? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. So that's why we don't talk about a convention centre, we talk about the precinct. That's a mix of retail, residential accommodation, office space, hotel, restaurants and bars. And so that whole precinct is what drives the economic return for the city and for the country. At the end of the day, I'm sure you've heard the hoteliers saying we need the convention centre. Tourism in the South Island is suffering because we haven't got a convention centre.
But isn't it ironic though, they're never the ones put up their hands and say we'll help subsidise it though. They expect you and I, the taxpayer, to subsidise this white elephant.
At the end of the day, it's part of the whole economic fabric of New Zealand.
Which to a certain degree I do understand. The trouble is though, do you know if this doesn't make money or it turns out to be a massive economic disaster, who's going to bail it out? Who's going to actually end up owning it? Who will upkeep the grounds? Who will run it?
Well, those are the things, as you're aware, we've publicly said that we're in discussions with Plenary Consortium Limited, or Plenary Conventions New Zealand.
Right.
And they're a consortia of two local companies and an Australian company. Those are the very things we are continuing to explore with them. Who will own it? Who operates it? What is the exit strategy for the Crown? Because obviously the Crown's underwriting the initial construction of the box itself, but we own the land around the precinct. So those are the discussions that are going on right now.
If you had a chance, and maybe you probably will do, to speak to the person who takes over your role, what would you tell them? What's the one bit of advice you would give them? Run.
Not at all. Look, I think the one piece of advice is, look, this is a fantastic job. It's been a fantastic...
If it's so good, why are you leaving?
Well, because at the end of the day, I'm following a personal path now, and I've got a great opportunity with the home building company I'm going to.
Is there anything other than signing off of heritage building demolitions that you regret, or you think that the CCDU, or Sarah for that matter, could have done better? Is there anything you concede and think, we should have done that?
No, I don't think so. And even on heritage, I don't have regret about what I had to do, but what I had to do was difficult. But look, when I look across the whole 4 years or so that Sarah's been in existence and the 2.5 years CCDU's been in existence, no, I've got no single regrets or things that I go, actually, we could have done way, way better on that. We've learnt as we've gone along, and we've changed how we've operated, but there's no one single thing I'd say, gee, that was a disaster.
In terms of the CCDU's brief that was to help spark private and international investment from outside of Christchurch, at least anyway, let's just, well, Christchurch. Now we've got the Christchurch City Council that's trying to create a one-stop shop for private investment. Does that necessarily mean that the CCDU has failed? Because why would the council bother doing what essentially the CCDU was initially set up to do, and that was to spark investment, whether that be nationally or internationally?
So if I look, and we talked earlier about when you go through the central city now, there's a huge amount of private sector investment.
Sure.
A lot of that is local, but also behind that there is national and international investment.
Is this more about transitioning then, do you think?
Well, no, I think it's also that the council has an ongoing role forever, really, to encourage investment.
Absolutely,
in the city.
they do.
And so I'm very pleased to see the council's thinking about these things with an eye to the future. We're a short-term organisation, but when I look in the central city right now, I'm happy with the level of investment we've got there right now, which collectively we haven't done on our own, but with the council now and other businesses in town, we've managed to get into the central city.
Well, Isaacs, appreciate your time.
Thanks, Chris.
All the very best for the future.
Thank you very much.
And that is our show. Thank you so much for joining me on Lynched. Don't forget to join me on News Talks will be tomorrow, where Christchurch Mayor Leanne Dalzell will join me, as she normally does on a Tuesday. But from me and all the CTV team, good night. Lynched on CTV was proudly brought to you by Christchurch's #1 dining offer, Sequoia 88, at the Redwood Hotel, a food concept unequalled.